Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. In terms of my talk today, in one of the videos we watched for class, there was data presented that and rather unbelievable number of people, in fact, many of them biblical naysayers, had never read the Bible. And it was proposed that perhaps an effective model for evangelism just might be prompting people in some way simply to crack open and peruse the scriptures. And so I began to wonder, what does it take to get someone to read a book, especially a book they don't necessarily want to read? And from there, I ended up personalizing the question and thought, well, what does it take to get me to read a book, for someone to get me to read a book, especially one that I've kind of already decided I don't care much about? And this brought me to two somewhat simple answers. The first, I think, is really applicable to any book, and the second is more specific to nonfiction. So the first solid method for getting me to read anything is to proclaim it awesome, right? This book is awesome. You need to read this book. Run, don't walk. You need to get this book like yesterday. It is awesome. Right? That's, as a matter of fact, how I ended up reading the Harry Potter series. Because when that book first came out, despite wonderful reviews left and right, interiorly, my take on it was, wizards studying wizardry in wizarding school? Are you kidding me? What adult is going to read that? But then a good friend of mine, whose taste I had a lot of faith in, said to me, forget what you think, forget what you know, read it. It's awesome. And that was enough to get me to start reading. And of course, it was fabulous. Now, in terms of the Bible, this would be an easy modality for me to work in. It would be an easy sell. I mean, when you have a historical journey full of fascinating protagonists, dramatic tension, spine-tingling adventure, mystery, intrigue, heart-shattering romance, all percolating in an inherently supernatural narrative, I have no problem whatsoever selling that to anybody as awesome, right? Now, the downside, though, to the it's awesome approach is that its effectiveness is in direct correlation with already having some investment in the speaker who's informing you, and what they think is awesome being somewhat similar to what you think is awesome. I mean, because there are people who think the Real Housewives of Orange County are awesome, and I'm not judging them, God bless them, but I don't know that I want that person informing me or advising me on, what's worth paying attention to, or what's worth reading, or what's worth watching. So the second way that someone can get me to read a book I otherwise probably wouldn't read would be to, and you'd have to pair the second way with the first way, that the book is awesome. But the second way would be that the book is true. That the book is true. This has all to do with how I ended up reading the book called Game Change, which is about the 2008 presidential election. The reason me reading that was pretty amazing is because I could not care less about politics. In fact, the best way to get me to not read something would be to tell me it's about politics. But a buddy of mine said, it doesn't matter if you like politics or not. What you have here are firsthand accounts of all the insider stuff, the arguments, the scheming, the concerns, all the backroom insider information from the individuals themselves, like eyewitness accounts of stuff that'll just blow you away. And I was in. Now, I can honestly tell you that up until about 3 years ago, I would never in a million years have believed that the Bible was both awesome and true. Undoubtedly, the Bible was as boring as watching a sockballing contest. That went without saying. And as far as truth went, clearly the Bible was just this sort of patched together random bunch of like tales and allegories and rules and regulations cobbled together by people in power over the years with all kinds of twisted mixed motives who added and subtracted portions as they saw fit. Now, amazingly, as previously mentioned, I had never read the thing. I mean, there were multiple times I took a shot at it, moments where along the way I decided that reading the Bible was somehow important. I wanted to at least be able to say that I read it, and figured clearly if you're going to read it, you would start from the beginning. And each time the experience was virtually the same. Genesis was pretty interesting. It held my attention. Exodus was pretty cool for a while and then got slow toward the end. And halfway through Leviticus, I was finished. I'd never even cracked the New Testament, and yet I was pretty sure I knew the whole Jesus story. Well, I can tell you that in terms of the Bible being boring or false, I've never in my life been so happy to be wrong. Although the question still looms, how do I inspire others to experience that same glory of being wrong? And so it seems that there are really two basic questions which need to be broached in purporting the awesomeness and more specifically the truth of the Bible. And honestly, I think the second one gives us the first one, because if the Bible's true, it's hard to make a case that it's not awesome. So the first question is what we read today in the Bibles we have available to us today the same thing is what was originally written down over 2,000 years ago? And the second question is what was originally written down over 2,000 years ago the truth? So let's begin with the question of whether the Bible we read today contains the same information that was written down initially. Now, in establishing whether this particular book of antiquity has been preserved accurately, we can actually use the same method used to validate all books of antiquity. And this is generally called the historiography. It's based on the idea that when it comes to texts this old, nobody has originals. There's really no such thing as having the original manuscripts. There was no preservable paper in those days. So texts were generally written on papyrus root, sometimes on animal skins or even clay pottery, and they would rot away over time. There was no way to preserve them indefinitely. So therefore, the first question we look to answer in terms of authenticity is how big a time lapse has occurred between the original manuscripts being written and the earliest copies that we can get our hands on being written. And this is called the bibliographical test. For example, with the writings and happenings of Caesar, there's about 1,000 years between the original writings and the earliest copies. With Plato, it's about 1,200 years. With Aristotle and Sophocles, it's about 1,400 years. And with Euripides, it's about 1,500 years. The earliest copies we have of the New Testament, get this, are only 50 to 75 years removed from the originals. So in terms of time lapse, the New Testament offers more legitimacy than any 10 other writings of antiquity combined. Then we have the secondary question in the same process, which asks how many complete manuscripts from that earliest point have been recovered throughout the world, which gives them an opportunity to compare them to each other. So again, in terms of other writings, the writings of Caesar, Plato, Euripides, Thucydides, Herodotus, all of them, no more than 10 original early manuscripts have been recovered and are available from the earliest years of retrieval. The numbers run a bit higher with Aristotle. There's about 40 to 50 manuscripts available. And with Sophocles, there's actually 193. The biggest number, the second place of total number of manuscripts would go to Homer's The Iliad. There's nearly 300 of them. But that runs so far behind the New Testament, which, are you ready for this? We have 24,633 manuscripts have been recovered of the New Testament throughout the world. So nothing else even comes close. It's not even a contest. What's more, another important piece that differentiates the New Testament from all other writings of antiquity is that we have tens of thousands of writings and letters written by the early church fathers in which there was a regular practice of copying large passages of the Bible word for word. We have so many of them, and they're so varied, in fact, that if you were to burn every early manuscript of the Bible we have, and you were to burn every Bible that exists in the world today, they would be able to reconstruct all but 11 verses of the original manuscript of what was originally scribed. So I think that's enough data to show that what was originally written down is what we have today. But if what was originally written down was not the truth, then really who cares? So let's take a look at that secondary question, the veracity of the words that were written by these men over 2,000 years ago. The first compelling point that we can point to here is that all the writers of the New Testament, by their own claims, are writing as eyewitnesses to the events written about, or are recording eyewitness account, right? So we know from our modern court system how much weight is given to eyewitness account. Again and again throughout the gospel, men like John, Peter, Mark, Paul, Luke claim that the events that they are writing about are either events they viewed and witnessed with their own eyes, or events that they investigated thoroughly through lengthy conversations with people who were there when the events took place. Further, many of these writers, in addition to claiming eyewitness testimony, regularly appeal to their opponents, to the naysayers, to the detractors of the message they were carrying, claiming that they too, the detractors too, saw and experienced many of these same events. Now, that would have been an incredibly stupid thing to write down if it were not true, as the people they're challenging are the very people who were dead set against Christianity gaining steam. And yet, there is no record of any of these folks stating that these claims aren't true, that they're false. Now, even more compelling than that, I think, is that both Luke in his gospel and Paul in his epistles wrote that after Christ's resurrection, Jesus appeared to hundreds of people, at one time to as many as 500 people at once, many of whom were still living and could verify both his crucifixion and his resurrection. Now, if this were written hundreds of years after Christ's death, they could have written anything they wanted because it wouldn't have been able to be verified. But to put into a document and then put that document into the public record that many people in powerful positions had a deep want to squelch and say that there were this many living witnesses if there weren't, would have been an act of sheer insanity. The people in power would have quickly and easily discredited those claims, and Christianity would never have gotten off the ground. Of course, we know that's not what happened. We also know that 11 of the 12 apostles, save for John, who died in exile on the island of Patmos, were tortured and martyred for their faith in Christ. And we know that not one of them, under incredible pressure, ever moved an inch off their claim that they ate and drank and spoke with the risen Christ, no matter what they were threatened with. They suffered and perished based on nothing but an empty tomb and a risen Savior. Now, does this automatically mean that it's true? Well, some might say that no shortage of people throughout history have died for a lie, or for what turned out to be a lie. Now, that is true. But in these cases, you're talking about people who died for what they thought was the truth. It turned out not to be. There's no way we could make that claim about the apostles, because they either saw and spent time with the risen Christ, or they did not. If they did not, then they surely knew that what they were claiming was untrue, and they would never have allowed themselves to be tortured and killed in the name of an untruth. Now, others might say that, well, maybe they knew he hadn't risen, but believed so much in the cause that they were willing to die. Because we have no shortage of people who've died for causes that they really believed in over the years. But in this case, their cause died on a cross. What you have to understand about the Jews for hundreds of years is they believed that what the Old Testament scriptures were prophesying were two different messiahs, not one, but two. The first they believed would be a suffering servant Messiah, and the second, a reigning political leader, a conquering Messiah. Now, eventually, that shifted some, and it was then held by the Jews that the Israelites themselves were the representation of the suffering servant Messiah. We know the Jews have done no shortage of suffering. That they were the suffering servant Messiah, that Israel was, and that the individual who would come would be the conquering Messiah, the political Messiah. Now, this is surely the notion that all the apostles would have been brought up with as children. That is why they asked Jesus things like whether they could sit on his left and right in his kingdom. They figured, this unbelievable leader has come and he's taken over and he's going to conquer Caesar, and we're in perfect position. We're his guys. They had no idea that he was going to be killed, in spite of some of the things he had said to them. And we know that because when he was killed, they were absolutely despondent, and they shut themselves up, feeling hopeless and in great peril. Consequently, if they had not witnessed the risen Christ, they would never have understood there to be any great cause to die for. Their perspective would have been that the one who gave them hope, that had come to take over and reign, had failed and died, and that they were now lost, having given up everything to follow him. Some of them even went back to what they were originally doing, specifically fishing. I believe that all these factors collectively show us that what we have in the New Testament is a book, or a series of books, revealing God's truth at their inception. They reveal God's truth at their inception, as well as a book or a series of books revealing God's truth in their current state. That both in their inception and in their current state, that these books give us the narrative, the true narrative of who God is and who we are. The true narrative of a people who were brought into existence, from which the truth was meant to come out of, who were lost, and a God who put together the most amazing rescue plan in the history of the world and played it out by coming down to earth, wrapping himself in human skin, walking without sin, getting on a cross, and letting himself be killed so that sin could be paid for, and people would have an opportunity to join him in the heavenly city for all time. And I gotta say, if that is not awesome, then I don't know what is. Thank you.